If you accept that disinformation narrative, that we don't have anything that can move like that, humans don't, a priori, you're going to reach the conclusion that everything that those objects are doing and have been doing are alien. CIA is using advanced tech to stage false alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina, targeting their word, peasants, for its psychological warfare value. It's in black and white. Media corporations are vertically and horizontally integrated into this covert system. And if you actually speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you will be canceled.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Watch Mojo's Unveiled podcast. I am your host, Rob, and before we kick it off with today's episode, this is your reminder that Unveiled is available on all podcast platforms. So go check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. Follow us, leave a rating and a review. It really helps us out. Today's guest is Dr. Stephen Greer. He is a physician, author, and founder of the Disclosure Project, who has been at the forefront of unveiling secrets about government secrets about UFOs and advanced technology for decades at this point. He joins me today to talk about that, as well as the CE-5 protocol that he has pioneered, which is a protocol for human-initiated ET contact. So we will get into all of that and much more. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Greer.
Yeah, great being with you.
So you need no introduction for a lot of the people listening to this podcast. You do a lot of them. So I'm just going to go out there and ask you, at this point in 2025, where are we at in terms of full and transparent disclosure and basically mainstream acceptance of an ET presence? Have we made any progress? Are we still very far away from that? What's your assessment?
Oh, we made tremendous progress since I got involved with this in 1990, 35 years ago. But, I think we're at an inflection point where it's going to get out there that we're not alone. The problem is what we can get into in a little bit, cosmological confusion. People don't know what's an extraterrestrial versus what's ours versus what's from another dimension that's extra-dimensional and not extraterrestrial. And there's some fine lines between the two, but very important ones. I think we're going to get into a period where clarification of which of these phenomena, plural, are actually from another star system and which are concocted by counterintelligence operations for the purpose of gaslighting the public, but more importantly, inducing fear and trying to build up a global military-industrial complex response to a threat from outer space. That's always been the objective of the secrecy, by the way. That's number one. Number two has been hiding the technologies that would terminate oil and nuclear power, and for that matter, wind and solar, with the very advanced energy and propulsion technologies, which have been mastered for well over 80 years. But this is why we did the documentary, The Lost Century, which everyone can see for free on Tubi or Amazon Prime or wherever. So I think this is going to be the big challenge. And what my job is, as I see it, I mean, I'm a retired trauma emergency doctor, but I'm focused full time on trying to get the correct information to the president and senior leaders in the House and Senate, which we have done. There's a countervailing disinformation campaign headed up by a number of people that keep neutralizing that clarity for the purpose of obfuscating the truth. I like the name of your show, Unveiled. I always say that a big part of what we're doing is pulling the veil back on this sort of labyrinthine system of secrecy and black budget programs that have been largely corporatized, that have confused the public and continue to gaslight the officials in government, not only here, but also in the United Kingdom and Canada and other places where I'm working. So I think this is a global problem. It's not just a U.S. problem. And that's what we're trying to address.
So you've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. What is happening currently that is kind of moving things forward right now?
Well, the most promising is this, and I have to walk very carefully here because I've been a senior source of intelligence and advice for the group doing this. But there's a federal law enforcement initiative at a very high level and a very secret level that has concluded what some of the members of Congress, like Mr. Burleson and others, that I've worked with have concluded, and that is that there is a transnational criminal organization that is running these programs that would make the mafia look like a minor law enforcement problem. And they have reached that conclusion, and that there are serious investigations. Now, this also brings up a number of questions, and that is, you can pass every law and go through everything that's going on now in the Congress with the Senate and the House, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the Defense Spending Bill, just for short. But if there's no law enforcement, it doesn't really matter, because if you don't stand down those corrupt and illegal programs, and you have to stand them down by all means necessary, and we can get into that. We hope it's non-kinetic, in other words, peaceful, but there needs to be preparation to do it under any conditions. And the reason for that is that the organization that have the technologies they reverse engineered from extraterrestrial vehicles, which was pretty successfully achieved by October of 1954. We had mastered gravity control, gravity wave propulsion systems by October 1954. So I was not a twinkle in my father's eye when that was achieved. I was born in 1955. I just turned 70. And so what I've found is that the technologies are in the hands of an unsupervised and rogue element that have abused them and are an existential threat, not only to our national security, but also to world peace and security. And it is something that is coming to a head only because as disclosure goes forward, there's a risk of a reaction from that group, the reactionaries, that could be very dangerous. The other big red line that's out there no one's talking about, and this is probably the biggest one, which I began to talk about some years ago, and it's now reached a point where I've gotten confirmation from 3 different sources inside intelligence operations at various bases where operations connected to UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrial craft, reverse engineering are, and that is that these technologies in the mid-50s were pretty amazing, actually, in terms of things that look like a UFO that can lift up, levitate, and fly off, right? And everyone would think that it was an alien craft, quote unquote. And those have been used in false flag operations and deceptive operations for decades. But what people don't realize is that there's a concomitant increase in the biological as well as electromagnetic weapon technologies from studying extraterrestrial materials that have now been turned against not only humans in some cases, but are being turned against the extraterrestrial vehicles and their people. And that there is a clear warning that's gone out that we've reached the point of being a threat to other places in space due to quantum potential weapons and scalar systems that go faster than the speed of light that have been weaponized, and that these programs are actually endangering all life on Earth. You cannot overstate the risk of this. Now, neither the president nor the Congress have a full grasp of the problem yet. They're beginning to, actually, very much so. But it's going to take some action, and the action is very intimidating because I don't know if I'll just tell you a story. It's apocryphal, but it's illustrative of the problem. 2 or 3 years ago, I was with some guys who had been in special forces, which for those who don't know would be your top military operations like Navy SEALs, the Delta Force, Green Berets, etc. And they are been asked to do something about this. And I said, well, here's what you're going to encounter. The mainstream Pentagon, our top special forces, have technologies circa 1940s, 30s, 40s, meaning jets, helicopters, Humvees, Jeeps, or the equivalent, tanks, various other weapons, right? You're going up against an organization that have technologies that have been developed over the last 80 years, since the mid-40s, that would make your toes curl if you were a military strategist. And I work with those people. So tactically, there's a big problem. And that is there's a mismatch between the constitutional government of the United States and the Pentagon, the legal part of it, and the illegal black part of it that have technologies that are thousands of years, and I'm not exaggerating, ahead. So then how do you resolve this problem? So there's a number of strategies that have to be employed. Legal ones, investigative ones, criminal prosecutions, the invoking of the RICO statute, the Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization law that was passed in 1970 to take down the mafia. Those all have to come into play. The Congress is going to have to be supportive, and more importantly, the White House, the Oval Office, are going to have to approve certain executive orders, which I've already provided to them. And if this doesn't get resolved, I think within a couple of years, we're going to be in a world of hurt. So I think that there isn't 80 more years to piss away, excuse my language, or even 30 more. When I first briefed President Clinton's CI director in 1993, that's when I learned that the president and the CI director at that time were being blocked and had not been read into or briefed on the matter. And I didn't believe it. The FedEx I have, it's in our archive. And actually, people want to see documentation on everything I'm going to talk about in this show. Go to Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. It's dpiarchive.com. It's free. It's 35 years of accumulated evidence, documents, terabytes of information, 115 or 20 whistleblowers' testimony with their name, rank, and serial number, as well as their video testimonies. It's all in there. It's way more than anything the House or the Senate will ever have in front of them, in my opinion, at least at this point in the nearby future. But, what I discovered was the chain of command got severed, and there was a decapitation, if you will, or a little bit of a coup d'etat that happened in the late 1950s when Eisenhower inadvertently lost control of these covert operations dealing with the retrieval and reverse engineering of extraterrestrial vehicles that had begun in the 40s. So in the late 50s, Eisenhower wanted to have an open contact event, much like what our CE-5 concept is, but governmental. And the ETs wanted to do it peacefully, and they wanted us to get rid of all these thermonuclear weapons and make peace on the planet. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is, I think these civilizations have a long-term interest in the planet that predates modern civilization as we know it. And number two, I think that when we detonate an atomic or a thermonuclear weapon, it sends out an electromagnetic pulse that has within it a scalar signal, which just visualize, instead of a wave like this, it's a point that goes out longitudinally at multiples of the speed of light, and it disrupts trans-dimensional interstellar communications and transportation. In other words, it's actually disruptive. It sort of rips through the universe that way. And this was not appreciated when we detonated the first atomic bomb, but boy, did we find out quickly thereafter, because there were swarms of ET craft and surveillance around all of our nuclear facility. And it's not because they were hostile. They realized that humans had reached a technological point of being able to destroy the whole planet, but also be a threat elsewhere. Now, you couple that with us going out into space in the 1950s. Sputnik was 1957. And then we went and progressed all the way to the lunar landing in 69 within 12 years. So they also knew that a covert program had reverse engineered their technologies, and that we had craft beginning in the late 50s, early 60s that were capable of not interstellar, but going around our solar system. So before we landed on the moon, we had what were called ARVs, or alien reproduction vehicles, that were zipping around out in our solar system. And we have firsthand testimony to this effect, by the way, in our archive. So at that point, the president and the oversight key people, the Gang of Eight, as they call them in the Congress, pretty much lost control of these covert operations. And this was the genesis of Eisenhower's famous speech, "Beware the military-industrial complex," because it will become a threat to our democratic way of life and our national security. He saw that firsthand. He did not refer to the UFO issue. But at the same time, he realized what he was up against. The only president that tried to go to distance against this cabal was Jack Kennedy, and it certainly got him assassinated. There's no question about that. The next president who I think probably did the most to try to do this, ironically, was President Clinton, who's CIA director I briefed. In 94, 95, they started a project after I had the meetings, and we provided a lot of documentation to the administration, briefing document that was about 500 pages long. Mr. Clinton reviewed this very, very assiduously, by the way, and he determined that they needed to stand up an operation known as Team Red, which would be a group of special forces guys who would take on what they called Team Black, meaning the illegal programs, now called legacy programs, that are sitting on all this tech and are keeping all this secret. And Team Blue was just a conventional military. Unfortunately, that entity, that Team Red entity, was under-engineered, meaning it was not able to take on what I described previously a few minutes ago, and most of them were killed or they were absorbed into these black projects. There are some that are still living who, when they were very young, were put in the Team Red trying to fix this problem, who now are in Team Black, who have come forward and are working with us and with law enforcement. So, but now they're, of course, 50s instead of 20, and they have a huge amount of knowledge and experience, but they're also very aware of the use of lethal force and so-called wet works, which are assassination, targeted killings. Wet comes from blood. And that, you know, they have to be very careful. And one of the things we're trying to also set up is surveillance around all these high-valued whistleblowers, and anyone who would make a move towards them, we will catch them red-handed. We, not me, but the people who are in senior law enforcement. So these are all things going on kind of sub rosa, behind the scenes, that, you know, I just want to address. And then there are the things you're going to hear about in the Congress that are the normal dog and pony show with ufology and whatnot. But I think that for the most part, we're at a key turning point. We're going to have to choose. And you know, one of the president's friends told me that he really wasn't wanting to take this on right now. And I said, well, he's not going to have a choice. You know, as I see it, there's not going to be a choice. This is going to happen on his watch, and it's going to happen well before in 2028. This is only 2025. And like it or not, this is all going to come out, and it has to be managed properly. If it's managed improperly, it would be much worse than the problems we had with COVID. So, and this has been said to me and understood to be the fact by some senior intelligence people with the administration. But here's what happens, honestly. People began to look into this as a curiosity, right? It's a fascinoma, as we say in medicine. Oh, isn't this interesting? Yeah, it is. And then they realize it's real. And then they have an oh shit moment. This is what my military people, what they just go and they go, oh shit. And then they realize what's really going on, and that everything we've been saying for 35 years is true, and that it's a massive national security problem with an organization and constellation of corporate and quasi-governmental interests that absolutely trump, no pun intended, the capacities of the conventional legal constitutional government. And that includes surveillance, by the way. You know, I've been in SCIFs, secure compartment and information facilities. The first thing I say when I go into there, I go, you know, everything in here is monitored, even though you're in a sealed, electromagnetically sealed space, because there are technologies the organization you're worried about and just now learning about have that can penetrate space-time and extract anything going on without normal electromagnetic field. And this is the physics that we understand is very advanced, and it's certainly off the radar of the normal briefings that Senate Intelligence or Armed Services or the president gets. So this is another disadvantage, is that the organization that is keeping all this secret, they have surveillance technologies, not just offensive weaponry and craft and man-made UFOs, which are the majority of the ones people see, by the way. They have these amazing abilities to penetrate any point in space or time and extract any intelligence or information from that volume of space and time. And they are not normal National Security Agency signals intelligence or SIGINT. It's very advanced tech. So this gets into another disadvantage, and that is the element of surprise can't happen. So ultimately, knowledge is power. So government officials having the knowledge about this and then knowing what tools in their toolkit they have and which ones are in the gray area, perhaps, of legality that need to be used that I won't talk about here. How do you fix this problem? And most importantly, you always have the rule of law. So, I mean, ultimately, civilization is the foundation of it, is that we collectively agree to live in a system that has certain rules and laws and what have you. And there are tools in the Department of Justice and FBI and federal marshals and Pentagon criminal investigative divisions that can bring brought to bear on illegal operations that involve in the embezzlement of huge sums of federal funds, and that would also stop the worst offenses going on that include the targeting and downing of innocent ET craft that are here to protect us, quite frankly. And then more importantly, or equally importantly, is the use of these same advanced platforms. They're called ATs, advanced technology. They used to be called ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, that are being used to target, kidnap, abduct, torture, and traffic humans, but also do human experimentation. And we know where some of this is going on. We have whistleblowers in those systems. And this has also been handed over to law enforcement. That's
a heck of a lot of information to unpack. But all this,
yeah, well, I was just giving you a quick overview.
Yeah, all this to say, President Trump has been fully briefed and has a complete understanding of all of this. And no, he doesn't.
He has some understanding, a complete understanding. No.
Okay.
He's busy. Here's the problem. You know, my people who work with me know that they boil everything down to 2 sentences, a paragraph, or at most 1 sheet of paper, because I'm just slammed right now. But when you're an executive like that, president or the chairs of these key committees, they have 1,000 things they're dealing with every day. So one of the big problems is that until something happens that forces them to put a lot of attention on this, they're going to get it in bits and pieces, right? So when I've been asked to do this, we actually have a briefing document we did for the president that we now have made available to the public. Anyone can get. It has some information redacted. It's the first time I published one of these, mainly because I think we're running out of time. But you know, a very good friend of the president said, if it's not on 1 sheet of paper, at the most 1.5 sheets, he's not going to review it. So I boiled down 20 terabytes of data that we have to 340 or 50 pages, and then boiled that down to 1 sheet. That's very difficult, by the way. It's harder to do a 1-sheeter that contains everything that's critical than to do something that's 20 or 30 pages long. Mm-hmm. But that's what you're dealing with. So, you know, now then you hope, and there are people who then are assigned to do a deeper dive, right? But ultimately, to make the right decision tree, you have to make decisions. You have to have a really depth of knowledge about it, you know, and this is true of anything, you know, whether you're dealing with the Ukraine war or the Middle East, or this is a problem that's larger than that, but unacknowledged. Take a word from the documentary film we did some years ago called Unacknowledged. By the way, Bill Clinton had told Sheryl Crow and one of her agents in a limousine that if when they were bugging him about the UFO subject, he said, well, I couldn't get too far and get much about it, but if you want to know what's going on, look at the documentary Unacknowledged. That's what President Clinton told them, which I thought was very funny. But, you know, I think this is where a little knowledge is sort of a dangerous thing, because in the little knowledge, you have the ability to be misled with disinformation in a lot of ways. Let me give you an example. You have people who are very much involved in some of the congressional and even people close to the president who have been gaslit and confused about what part of this is ours and what part of this is extraterrestrial or NHI. But NHI means non-human intelligence, which is a wastebasket term, which means anything non-human. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, do we mean dolphins? Dolphins are intelligent and are thought to have a higher IQ than humans. Are we talking about, what do we mean with NHI? See, these are terms that are concocted because they are deliberately obfuscating. They confuse people. So I like being very specific when I go into a brief. And I go, well, we have interstellar civilizations that are also transdimensional. Because you're going beyond the speed of light, which means you have to traverse other dimensions in order to go from point A to B. It's quantum entanglement, right? Now, you also have weird things. You know, it's kind of like that. I gave lectures about this WSF, great term from the CIA, WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. It's all the really secret stuff. And that's what it's called. And my uncle was Northrop Grumman engineer his whole life, and he worked on the team that put the lunar module on the moon with Neil Armstrong. But at Northrop, they just call it PFM, pure fucking magic. You can redact that word if you want.
That's okay.
But,
we'll leave it in.
All right. But so that's really what it's called. And it's very advanced stuff. So what you have is the ability to then not only have man-made UFOs using WSFM weird technologies like Stranger Things that can then induce phenomena from another dimension, extra-dimensional beings. So, and these are beings, I mean, you might call them boogums, goblins, demons, angels, whatever. And that is not an extraterrestrial biological entity, an EBEN. But if you are new to this, like the president or members of Congress, I'm sitting in Washington, the White House is right there, the Capitol Dome's right there. I can see it from my condo here. And what you realize is that they're starting out just beginning to look into this. And we have to bring them from that to a PhD level in a very short amount of time with very little time that they have. So this is the challenge. It's a iterative educational challenge and briefing. And I've become expert at doing that because I've been doing it since 1993 when I briefed President Clinton, the CIA director. But it's a daunting task, really, because it's a very complex problem. Then you have, therefore, wrong conclusions. For example, let's say you have certain luminaries that have come along in the last couple of years in this field, like Lou Elizondo and others, and they'll go in and say, we don't have anything that can fly like that, right? Now, as soon as that Tic Tac video came out, look at the record. I said, that's a Lockheed Skunk Works device. And since then, there's an executive at the Lockheed Skunk Works that's confirmed that. Now, members of Congress knows that's one of our covert anti-grav or gravity field propulsion devices. They've been around since the late 50s. That particular structure, we have documentation from 1967 in Pennsylvania, operational. And we have several new whistleblowers who have come forward who are Green Berets, who have been on special operations where that device has been used for surveillance. So now I knew this in 17, 18, when that whole brouhaha happened. And I went, no, that's not alien. And I spoke to the pilot, Fravor, David, and I said, look, Dave, this is ours. And he says, there's no way. I said, yeah, it is, way, you know. But this is the problem. This is the big problem. If you accept that disinformation narrative, that we don't have anything that can move like that, humans don't, a priori, you're going to reach the conclusion that everything that those objects are doing and have been doing are alien when they're not. They're false flag operations. And this includes mutilations of cattle and people, abductions, human trafficking, moving arms and drugs around, all kinds of skullduggery. And so those criminal actions being done by this organization, the way they cover it up is to claim everything weird going on is extraterrestrial when it isn't. Now, I knew this in the early 90s, 91, 92. I had people come to me from Army intelligence and the aerospace sector at my uncle had worked his whole life in, and said, hey, that thing that just happened, it's all over the UFO news, that was us. And then I had people come forward who had been on the man-made UFOs, made to look alien, who were then doing abductions for their psychological warfare purpose. And, if you look at our documentary, The Cosmic Hoax, what we had there was we found a document, a reference by Jacques Vallée, that he had received a document from, and he made this entry in his book in 92. But the document was from 1985, where it states that the CIA is using advanced tech to stage false alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina, targeting their word, peasants, for its psychological warfare value. It's in black and white. So then the question is, how much of what people think are alien isn't? And how much of it is ours? And how much of the phenomenon that's the Stranger Things kind of stuff, like the Montauk experiment, where they did all kinds of electromagnetic experiments and these weird creatures would pop into this dimension, and some of them got loose and ran off. I don't know if you know this, but that was in the 60s. So you have a whole constellation of weird, strange things. And people are not, what this is like, honestly, as a doctor, I look at it, is like if you had a really dumb doctor, and there are a few, I hate to admit out there, and you have chest pain, and he says, oh, you're having a heart attack. Quick, get the TPA, do this, do that. Of course, it actually is a dissecting thoracic aneurysm, and you give a blood thinner and you're going to bleed out and die in 2 seconds, or it's pulmonary embolus, or it could be dozens of things, right? What's happened with the UFO subject is that no one is doing what we call in medicine a proper differential diagnosis. And to even do the differential diagnosis, you need a fund of knowledge to start with, a baseline knowledge of the cosmology of what's going on and which is which. And this has been the biggest struggle I've had over the last 30 years is, getting people to understand that, so that they're not ascribing to quote, aliens, a term I don't use, because aliens have become a wastebasket for everything weird, right? So anything that's kind of like a poltergeist or a Bigfoot or something from another dimension, or something that the CIA is doing on their psychological warfare operations, all of that's called alien when it isn't, right? So I try to use very specific terms like an extraterrestrial biological entity, even with a craft from another star system, as opposed to something that's from a parallel dimension that's within space-time, where, this gets almost into a theological discussion of creatures that could exist in other dimensions that aren't 3D, but with enough intention can become 3D. And that is, gets into, I love the story when I was at the Vatican in the 90s when Pope John Paul was the Pope. And I was meeting with his senior theologian, a wonderful man who got very involved in the UFO subject, named Monsignor Balducci. And I was at his apartments overlooking St. Peter's. And, we started talking about this. He says, look, neither angels nor demons require flying saucers. And it was funny, but it was such a clear way of saying this. And by the way, he was a demonologist for the Pope and for the Vatican.
I know that was a thing.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole area of theological study. Well, then now, fast forward to now, where you have people very close to the president, like Tucker Carlson, who has been gaslit, where the whole ET issue has gotten confused with the man-made problem. And that the overlay that he's accepted is the demonic extra-dimensional problem, which, of course, he's very religious, which is fine, but he's mixed all that together. Mm-hmm. So, and this is why people do it. The counterintelligence and disinformation operatives, like Elizondo and others, do it deliberately, because that's how you get you achieve your goal. The goal being to convince people there's an extraterrestrial threat, so that we can create a totalitarian global military system and unite the world, not in peace and some golden age of enlightenment, but in war, endless war. That's the long-term agenda. And it's about control of the human populace, but it's also about, quite frankly, vast amounts of money and power, because they would like for this to be disclosed in a way that redounds to the benefit, that flows to the benefit of the same military industrial covert players that have been keeping this secret. So that's what I call capture of disclosure. You know, it's just like big oil captured environmental research. Where you have capture of disclosure that's happened with these counterintelligence operations, most of whom don't even know that's what their role is. They're just doing as they're told, or being given partial and false information, and then seeing that the doors open so that they can speak about it. What you'll find is that the people who actually know all the truth about this will not be allowed to speak about it on large platforms. Like I was on Joe Rogan back in 2013 or something. And in order for him to get his $100 million, they had to take my interview out of the lineup. Right?
Yeah, I watched it in preparation for this interview. I had to go and find it. Somebody else uploaded it on YouTube, and I was able to watch it.
Oh,
but
really?
What was remarkable was that, you know, your story has not changed one bit since 2013. It's been this exact same thing. And so Joe Rogan in particular has seemed so embracing of this whole UFO disclosure thing, and has had many other people on his show, but hasn't invited you back and rarely speaks about you, which I find odd.
He's not allowed to. You know, I mean, this happens all the time. I was on a military show a couple times, named Sean Ryan. It's a Navy SEAL. And after I brought Michael Herrera, a Marine, on, and some other whistleblowers who had seen the man-made anti-grav and the man-made tech being used in criminal operations, and he had me on, and then another show with them, he and his whole staff and family got threatened. And so now I'm banned off of that show. And he feels terrible. I have a voicemail from him. But this is what typically happens. You can go on 60 Minutes if you tell half-truths and lies, because the major media corporations are vertically and horizontally integrated into this covert system. And if you actually speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, you will be canceled. You will be banned. You know, my TikTok channel about a month ago was just taken offline, completely canceled, because what I was revealing about what was going on with the Bugosphere in Mexico City.
What can you tell us about that? Because that's something that I wanted to ask you about that, as well as you know, some of the other topics that have been making the rounds. There's the Nazca mummies, which have been getting increased exposure in recent weeks. And this ties into what you featured in your first documentary series about the Atacama humanoid, and it ties into, you know, you going back and rewatching that. I was surprised because I didn't remember what a large role Dr. Gary Nolan played in analyzing that that body, and then looking at the things that he has said publicly since. It kind of contrasts with what was presented in the film. What's your reaction to the findings and the statements that he's made about it?
Well, we know they were false. And around the time we handed off the DNA sample to him, he received about a little over $3 million in funding from the Department of Defense. And the top two geneticists in the world, one of whom worked closely with Watson and Crick, who, of course, discovered the DNA molecule, have analyzed the work he did and said it was deliberately fraudulent, and that it almost absolutely did not reflect, and it wasn't even done properly, how you would do what's called ancient DNA, you know, not a living species like you or me doing a DNA sample, but something, you know, that's very old, decades or hundreds of years old, which we don't know. So unfortunately, that research was completely fraudulently done, and we can prove it. Now he's getting money from CIA to prove that the NHI are creating brain damage in humans, when in reality, all those occurrences are man-made psyops, as I just described. So it's disheartening. And the question is, what's your price? What is your price? For Joe Rogan, it was $100 million. For Spotify, for Gary, it was whatever. The head of Army Intelligence, General Stubblebine III, offered me $2 billion in 1992 to shut up and not do what I'm doing. I said, no, thanks. I don't want it. Don't need it. I'm not going to have you own me. Everyone has a price, it seems, in our current society. This is the problem. And so that's what happened. But let me just say on the record, I don't know what the Atacama humanoid is. Because the test, he took the DNA material and then it was all falsified data. We can prove it. If you doubt it, go into the Atacama section of our archive, dpiarchive.com. All of this is in there, all the evidence of this. But look, I'm one guy and I'm constantly being run over by people who, we trust, and then they end up getting enough money or threats or whatever it is. It's a combination of blackmail and bribery, right? That happens, and threats. But that's just how humans are. I mean, for the most part. I mean, not everybody. I'm obviously working with some wonderful people who I trust very much. But, this is what happens over and over in the UFO world. And it's almost rare that it doesn't, frankly, if you really have something important. Now, so I would like to see that pursued. I did hold back a tiny little bit of the rib of the Atacama humanoid to be tested. The question is, who do I trust to do the test? And, because when I was first connecting with Gary Nolan, he was, nobody knew who he was. He reached out to me and then offered to do this. And we met, and I kind of educated him on the subject and brought him forward. And then, of course, he betrayed that trust by falsifying the report. And in fact, I have a top geneticist, one of the top geneticists in the world, who offered help to Dr. Nolan at Stanford to do it properly. And he flat out refused and says, no, I don't want anyone involved looking at this. So he rejected that person. In fact, I was just texting him today. And he's a preeminent. He started some of the major genome sequencing companies in the United States. He's a PhD. But some of these, so when that happens, you just go, well, this is par for the course. Remember, this issue, according to the 1950 memo from Top Secret from Canada, the Wilbur Smith memo, it's called in our archive, states that this is the most secret program in the history of the United States, surpassing the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb, which in 1950 was in development but had not been perfected or detonated. So you can imagine the kinds of money and threats and inducements that are done to keep this secret, or now that it's coming out, have it come out in the way that this cabal wants it to come out, the false narrative, which leads to people going, oh my God, we're being invaded. It's Alien Invasion Week on the History Channel, and that kind of rubbish. But this is really what it's about. It's about the narrative and the control of the future by disclosing the subject in a false manner that induces fear, and then you control the masses through fear. I mean, look what they did with COVID. They were able to shut down the whole planet, even though now the World Health Organization, amidst the shutdowns, made things worse. And every doctor I know with an IQ over 110, frankly, knows that that was a mistake. Everyone. And everyone knew at the time. We were all screaming at the television. But, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And so what we're racing against the time clock right now is to see that, since I'm fairly confident this is all going to get disclosed in the coming 6 to 24 months or so, how is it coming out? And how is that narrative going to be spun by these masters of Spinmeister who do control the organs of communication on big podcasts and on network television, et cetera, and so on? And this is not a left-right thing. It doesn't matter if it's MSNBC or CBS 60 Minutes or Joe Rogan or Sean Ryan or any of them, or Fox News. They're going to have cherry-pick people who will say what CIA/BlackRock want them to say, right? Because that's where the money is. Those are where your controlling boards are. And I think that this is a big problem because everyone thinks we have, a free press. Well, we don't. We have a free press to a point. We have a managed media and press, which is not free. Everyone thinks we have a free market. We don't. How do we have a free market economy if the most important technological inventions and discoveries of the last 100 years have been viciously suppressed? So where's the free market in that? Why are we still using oil and diesel and coal and utilities, transmission lines that come down in every little storm? We haven't needed that type of energy grid since at least the 1920s, when Nikola Tesla discovered a lot of what he did that was kept secret. So, I tell people that everyone is living in the Truman Show. If you saw the movie with Jim Carrey, who's very supportive of the work we're doing with this, and particularly the consciousness and CE-5 work, it's like everyone's sort of living in this Truman Show. And slowly, I hope, wake up to the fact they're on a set. And this, I know it's rather comical. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it, with Jim Carrey, The Truman Show. But so I think that's where we're all living in a Truman Show. But the Atacama humanoid, maybe we'll find someone who can do an honest test again. I don't know. I've been kind of burned, so I'm skeptical. I will tell you that the top guy at Stanford, and probably the top guy in the world, a medical doctor who I met with, who Gary knew, who did the analysis of the CAT scans and x-rays, he said this was absolutely not a fetus, that it was a child of our approximate 6 years of age in human years, because the bones had epiphyseal plates, which is where your bones grow, your long bones in your arm and legs, your growth plates. You don't have that in a fetus. It's cartilaginous. And he said this absolutely isn't a fetus. But that's what the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the medical journal said after this fraudulent report came out. That sort of submarined the whole thing. And so we have the science and the proof to say it's not what Nolan said it was, but I can't tell you what it is because the tests were never done, except they were done fraudulently. So that then brings up a question of these mummies. Yeah. Now, I have seen them. When I was in Mexico City with Congressman Burleson a couple months ago, they had a couple of the small ones, but they also had people who had samples of the bigger ones. And we have some of those samples. We're looking for an honest broker, a non-corruptible entity to do the tests. But non-corruptible, you don't know they're corruptible until they are. Gary was a great guy until he got corrupted. So what am I going to do? I mean, it's a real problem of trust. But we're going to try, and I've been asked to do that. My assessment is that they're certainly real, and real what? I don't know. There's some indications some of them may be biological animals that they made to look like some of the ETs they'd had contact with. I know that it's like the cargo cults of the Pacific in World War II, where the native people made shrines to a little biplane that landed on the islands during World War II. It's a great book, Cargo Cults of the Pacific, in World War II. So some of them may be representations of non-human ET beings. Some of them may be actual ones. And the question is, the actual ones, are they of Earth origin because they were here before modern human civilization and have evolved on Earth? Or are they more recent, as in the last couple thousand years, visitors from other star systems? Now, the reason I think some of them are extraordinary is that some of them have plates, metal plates embedded in them. Not an implant per se, but they seem to be some type of bioelectronic interface device. And some of them have very high, significant amount of osmium. And osmium wasn't even on our periodic tables until, I think, 1903. So, and they're older. They're 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 years old. So what is that? I mean, we didn't even know that element existed. Never mind had the ability to mine it. And osmium is a very specific metal used in high-tech electronics. So it makes you wonder. So there's a lot of smoking guns here with that. But we have to do the science. The same thing with the boogosphere. Yeah. So I wasn't able to get any metal samples from the mummies, which we need to have, that need to go through very careful scientific analysis. We were able to get about a gram of metal from the Boogosphere. You can work this in, you can show people what it looks like. It's about this big around. And around the equator of the sphere, which was an anti-gravity sphere flying around that landed in Buga, B-U-G-A, Colombia, was then subsequently brought to Mexico City by Jaime Maussan, who I've known for years and is a friend of mine. That sphere around the equator have these teeny little holes. And in those holes, there's a black material that's a type of polymer. So we're going to try to carbon-14 date that, right? Because you can't carbon-14 date metal because it's no carbon, right? But in those little holes, we found hair-like, finer than my hair, or little hair I have left, filaments of fiber optics with very high-tech stuff. And it's also embedded in the metal of the sphere, which is some type of super hard aluminum alloy. It's harder than our aerospace aluminum alloys that we have. So we're trying to set up through a very high-tech testing lab. I wanted it done 2 months ago, but the bureaucracy of these labs that do a lot of this work is significant. But we're trying to get it set up so we can do an analysis on the metal to get the exact composition, get the carbon dating from the polymer, and get a date. Because if the date predates the ability to have that kind of composite material, then you have a significant finding, right? Because it predates the modern era. Yeah. And then also to see if the metal is due to certain gamma ray emissions from Earth origin or from out in space origin. And now these are very expensive tests. We're probably going to have to spend something like $20,000 or $30,000 to do it, which is why we crowdfund all this, folks. So those of you listening, it's like there's no pot of gold that we have. We're just trying to limp along with donations. But that we hope to get going in the next month or so. The tests take about 2 weeks, so it'll be a while. I'd wanted the results to be, and we're doing a new documentary. It's really ultimate disclosure documentary that should come out this fall. But I don't think these results will be back in time to make the final cut on that. But we will release them immediately to the public. I had hoped we'd have them by now, but it's out of my hands. But I do think that we're dealing with something extraordinary. And the main reason for it, when I held it, and when I looked at the inside on the CAT scan, and then the metal, the way it's constructed, to give you an idea, if we have something that's a metallic sphere and there's some fiber optics, they're in conduits and they're in separate tracks. Mm-hmm. Not this. Typical of ET manufacturing, it's like 3D printing, where all those components are formed in a unitive way, in one single form. And it's very advanced manufacturing techniques. And so what I think we're dealing with here is something quite extraordinary. Age of it, I don't know. I do think that the writings on it were put on later. That's my own assessment of it. They look done by hand. They may have been done by people who had contact with older civilizations or ETs. Now we're speculating. Mm-hmm. These are informed speculations. They're educated guesses, but we don't know. We need to get it dated. We need to analyze the metallurgy. But the thing that would indicate that it's something extraordinary, if it's human, it's more extraordinary than if it's non-human. And for this reason, when it landed, it weighed about 2 kilograms, about 4.5 pounds. It currently weighs over 10 kilograms or 22 pounds.
Wow, so, that's a big difference.
Yes, you were talking, pretty much a 5-fold difference in weight, 500%. Why? Well, when you understand how gravity wave and electronics work, you can take an object like this and you can put through an electromagnetic field, you essentially can change the angular momentum and the mass of the atoms, not just, but each atom. And if it reached masslessness, it can disappear out of this dimension reappear, teleport at another point in space-time, right? But when it's 3D, when it's functioning, it's still it's operating not through a propulsion system, but through gravity wave fields and electronics that alter the actual mass of the object in this one gravity Earth atmosphere. And it's very, very interesting physics that we understand quite well, by the way. So the fact that it was 2 kilos when it landed, when the man who, and I interviewed that man personally when I was in Mexico City, then it ended up weighing 5 times that now, because I picked it up. It's heavy, you know, and I'm going, wow, this would indicate some really extraordinary electromagnetic propulsion waves from this thing. There have also been some interesting phenomenon with energy coming out of it. After it was sitting there for a month, they put water on it, and it just sublimated the water straight from water to gas, right? So it just, boom, evaporate. But it was cold to the touch. There's some strange electronics with this. Now, when it landed, it also left a big circle area where the grass died. And we're trying to get some samples of that soil and that grass, because this is very similar to the craft that landed at Rendlesham Forest, Bentwaters Air Force Base in the early 80s in England, and where that pyramid-shaped craft landed, and it completely altered, but it wasn't radioactive in the way of like uranium or what we call ionizing radiation, but it had a radiation of energy that altered that and was measurable. And the Ministry of Defense in the United Kingdom, we eventually got them to release those files and prove this. But this has done a similar thing. Now, this is not a whole craft, but it's this sphere, you know, whatever it is, 1.5 feet across or whatever. And it did the same effect, which I think is somewhere on the electromagnetic spectrum of radiation. Because, you know, you have microwave, ultraviolet, you get burned. You have all kinds of X-ray. So what kind of weird combination of frequencies was this putting out when it was just dying after it hit that power line and it went down? And it didn't crash, it just softly landed. But what kind of energy was it putting out that it had that effect on the grass and soil? It's very interesting. And the young man that picked it up, it kind of made him nauseous and dizzy, which is also very typical of electromagnetic field radiation of certain frequencies, whether it be microwave or something else. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of investigation to still do on this, and the jury is out. But I would say if I were a betting man, which I'm not, I would give it a 90% likelihood that it's of extraterrestrial origin, age unknown. If it's a man-made origin, it's even more interesting, because it means there's some operations going on in South America using reverse engineered ET tech to do some kind of surveillance and operations, which I would think actually is a more explosive conclusion. And it's one of those two things.
Definitely very interesting. Has a lot of people talking and keep hearing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Not to change subject too abruptly, but I would really like to talk to you about the CE-5 protocol.
Sure.
Particularly because over the past year, we've had a lot more people talking about these types of things from stuff that whistleblowers had said. I'm thinking about Jake Barber in particular, his organization Skywatcher, which has their whole thing is using different methods to summon UAP, to take measurements, study them, whatnot. But from your perspective, what is your goal with conducting CE-5 practices, and what do you think it should be used for?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, actually. I started this whole project in 1990 as a young doctor, not to do disclosure. I did it to create a citizens ambassador movement to make contact with these civilizations peacefully. That was the mandate. That was the purpose. In 92, when we invited ET craft to come onto a beach near Pensacola, 4 of them appeared. They were photographed. It appeared on the front page of the Pensacola paper. And the next thing you know, I have Murder Incorporated from the National Security Agency and Pentagon military people who are part of these black projects approached me, as well as what I call the white hats who wanted to help. So that's how I got turned over into doing disclosure. But this, the CE-5, there's an app, by the way, anyone can get it at your app stores. It's CE-5 Contact. And it is a whole training module in how to make contact with these civilizations and not summon them. You summon the butler on Downton Abbey, or the King of England summons a butler. We don't summon anybody. This is disrespectful. We invite them to interact and come near us if it is safe for them and for us, and for the purpose of developing at least an early relationship between humans and these civilizations. This is the real mandate of my whole organization long term. It's also what I'm suggesting now to the president and to members of Congress, that they need to pivot the military away from targeting and downing the objects to creating a CE-5 contact scenario, which I had actually when I was a young boy, about 20 years old. I had a lucid dream. My grandmother was full Cherokee on my dad's side, and they tend to have lucid dreams of the future. I met my wife in a lucid dream. I see things in lucid dreams a lot. And I saw way in the future when I was older, an event like that would happen. And where there would be the cooperation of the military and governments of the world in an open contact event that the entire world would see. And I think that's what we need to be doing rather than shooting them out of the sky with electromagnetic pulse weapons and scalar weapons, which is what, Jake Barber's team was involved with. It was a kinetic downing and tracking and downing of these craft. He was more responsible for transportation and security and picking them up. He was not policy. In other words, he was a contractor and had been Delta Force. And I've known him for some years, by the way, before he came out publicly. But, what they have found is that when you're communicating with a civilization that advanced, they're not using, like you and I are talking on this system, which is at the speed of light. Mm-hmm. So let me take your listeners to an exercise, and it's a simple one. I did this with the CIA director and his wife in '93. So let's say you're from a nearby star system, 1,000 light years from here, and that's the distance. A light year is not a time measurement; it's a distance measurement of how far a beam of light would go at 186,000 miles every second for a year. Mm-hmm. 1,000 light years is only 1% of the way through our own galaxy, the Milky Way, right? So let's say you're 1,000 light years from here, and you want to communicate with your people on a craft here at the Earth or in this solar system. At the technology you and I are using, it would take 1,000 years to say hello, how are you doing today? And another 1,000 years to say, oh, I'm doing fine. How's your day been? Right? It's 2,000 years. So I knew as a young man when I had an early contact experience. When I was 18 is when I had contact and formed the CE-5 contact protocols. It was October of 1973, actually. And what I realized was that they were using technologies, but their technologies are interfacing with a consciousness field and with intended thought, a coherent thought. Now, of course, I get ridiculed endlessly for this, but I always point out to people, why would civilizations 100,000 million years more advanced than ours be using Steve Jobs' iPhone, which is like just junk from the 1800s. I mean, 1844, we sent the first telegraph, right? Which is electromagnetic radio frequencies. That's all you and I are using. That's all GPS is. So we're stuck there in the mid 1800s. But we have to realize that civilizations that advance, they're not stuck in 1844 just because we are. Their paradigm for energy, communications, everything way more advanced. So visualize having a device that you can turn your attention to, think to it, no wires, but it's the quanta of thought and intentionality of thought activates that system and it navigates your spacecraft or it does something. Now, this sounds like magic to most people, but I will point out that if we went back to my country house is right near Thomas Jefferson's house, Monticello. If we went back to the late 1700s and showed Thomas Jefferson this cell phone and this system, it would be magic. It would be witchcraft, actually. I guess in Salem, Massachusetts, you'd be burned at the stake as a witch. So I think that that's only 200 years of Earth technology. Now, extrapolate hundreds of thousands or millions of years with civilizations that have been around a very long time, our older, much older brothers and sisters. I think we have to realize that their technology is going to be very, quote, strange, but I try to bring logic to it. It makes total sense. And we documented, Dr. Richard Haynes at NASA did a whole book based on my initial concept in 1990 of Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And by the way, there's a movie called Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Everybody can see it. You can see it for free on these same platforms. And what we found was that there were people all over the world, thousands of people, that had seen an ET craft and just thought to it to move this way or move that way, and it would do it. It completely coherent with what they were thinking. And this is a well-documented part of the phenomenon. Now, it crosses over into the weird tinfoiled hat Ouija board crowd very quickly if you're not careful and if you're not assiduous. But that is what has been known in covert programs, but also since the 40s and 50s. They knew that the ET communications and telemetry was actuated transdimensionally through the conscious field interfacing with a very refined level, let's say, of electromagnetics, right? So that's why I call it transdimensional interstellar civilizations. And they're using those technologies. So, by the way, those of you who want to come, we're going to be doing a whole mass contact event in the Arizona desert. I don't know where you are in September 19th, 20th, and 21st. And we're going to have two of those nights. We're going to be out on Native American land on the edge of Scottsdale with a whole group doing the remote viewing using consciousness, meditation, and invite the ETs to come in. Of course, we're right in a crowded airspace corridor, but we have had some amazing things happen just boom, very quickly when we've done these mass contacts of events. And so that's something I'm trying to train people to do, because the ultimate disclosure, in my opinion, the ultimate is humans bypassing this covert route and making contact with these civilizations, and to the point where they open up. Now, one of the hindrances to that, a big one, is that the Earth is an armed camp. So between the satellites in space and the air-based and ground-based and sea-based weapons that have these electromagnetic pulse systems, where as soon as these craft come out of trans-dimensional space-time into 3D, they're picked up on and they're hit, or at least they attempt to hit them. And so I always tell people we're doing CE-5 contact in a hostile theater of operations known as Earth, circa 2025. But it doesn't prevent us from doing it or having some amazing results. It just means you have to have your eyes wide open and realize that there are some OPSECs, as they say, operational security issues, that both I use as well as the ETs use, because of the fact we're not peaceful yet dealing with this issue. But I think that day will come, and that's why I'm recommending to people in the government, the very first thing they hit, if they're going to hit anywhere, are these offensive capabilities these covert programs have, and stand those down. Because if they don't stand them down, I think at a certain point, the ETs will stand them down. But that will look like an alien invasion. That's what they're trying to avoid. That's what I'm trying to avoid. It's like we need to not hit that tripwire. And, I know that, I've been over a couple of these black sites in a classified area where at each of these two sites I was over near the Edwards Air Force Base Complex, there had been one or two ET craft down per year for 45 years. Now you go do the math. And there are facilities like that all over the world, not just United States. So we're viewed very skeptically by ETs for a reason. And that is, no one's actually done anything rational. We've done military operations against them, but there's never been a State Department or a foreign ministry or a United Nations say, oh, they're here, let's make contact and be rational and have a dialogue. So that's where I stepped in 1990 and came up with this concept of CE-5 contact. A close encounter of the fifth kind is just when humans initiate the contact, right? Mm-hmm. And you can look at the different categories, CE1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the fifth is when we initiate it voluntarily out of a peaceful initiative. Now, the dark end of this, so let's say, I always use the analogy of all the people I've taken care of who've been stabbed with a steak knife. You can use a knife to cut your bread, or you can use it to slit your throat, right? Or someone's throat. This technology, consciousness technology, can be used for very good purposes, like we're doing, but it can be weaponized. And that's what Jake and some of those other people witnessed. They saw the weaponization of the consciousness machine interface, because they had what are called P3 operators or psionic operators that went through a brutal training program, so that they were basically human machines that the people controlling them could use to connect with the ET guidance systems using consciousness and thought, but also electronics. And they were put on dopamine and all kinds of drugs. Most of them died or ended up in comas. But the ones that made it through that program, they were able to then essentially hijack the guidance systems on an ET vehicle and pull it within strike range and then strike them. So this is a very dangerous game being played. And I think this is why General Stubblebine offered me the $2 billion. He knew that I had figured out how contact is made, and he knew I was a medical doctor, and that I would be able to connect these dots and help them develop their Hitlerian nasty little program. And I told him no thanks. But that program's been going on for a long time. But it's a brutal, violent use of the same concept of a conscious and thought interface between humans. Now, the way we do it, we're not using drugs and we're not using electronics. We're doing it naturally, because have I been offered the electronics to do this? Yeah. I don't want them, because I know they can be abused. It falls into the hands of the wrong people. So if people develop their own meditative skills, and the CE-5 contact app you guys can get, it has a whole training program for meditation, remote viewing, using consciousness, field consciousness to see remote places in time and space, make contact, vector, invite them over. And I mean, we've had such amazing things. We had an 82-year-old man who tried this about a month ago, I think. And he was very skeptical it would work. And he went out and did it and used the technology. And we have some electronic tones we send out into space that are from a crop circle that I'm quite sure was put there on purpose by them. And the next thing you know, he has this whole craft come in. And so this happens, and it's amazing. But a good primer for people is the documentary Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. And here there are a lot of people, William Shatner does it, and Demi Lovato, and there are, Aaron Rodgers, and there are a lot of people doing CE-5 now that have helped get the word out about it. But we're going to do this conference, so everyone's invited. And if you can't be there in person, there's a webinar for the whole Friday night, Saturday, Sunday that you can participate in. And I think it's going to be a great experience. The other reason it's important to do a group, if you dig into, and this is in the movie Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, if you dig into field consciousness and you look at the pioneering work of people like Dr. Bob John at Princeton, he was the professor emeritus of engineering at Princeton University. And he's passed away, but I got to talk to him, and he had set up random number generators that were just basically spitting out zeros and ones, like little quantum computers just sitting. And he found that if he puts people in a room and had them just look at it and intend with their consciousness, intend it to put out more ones, they would. But if you had two people do it that were loved each other or knew each other, there was a bond, a coherent bond, it was tenfold more. So my view is that if we have hundreds of people or thousands of people doing it, then it can have this effect that will alter the timeline and alter human consciousness and create a time of universal peace instead of global interplanetary war. I mean, I think that's the choice we're facing, right? Do we want endless war that escalates to interplanetary? And that, by the way, that conflict would last about 3 nanoseconds. It'd be over very quickly.
Not much of a fight.
No. Or do we want to take this other path? Now, everyone there are a lot of people who say, well, some of these aliens are hostile. I said, well, are they really hostile to Earth and humanity, or are they hostile to the military industrial complex? Right? Who are they hostile towards? Every single person, like Jake Barber, that I've talked to, like Sergeant Stone, Clifford Stone, who was one of our early whistleblowers, who was on retrieval teams, every single one of them said they were non-hostile, and and actually were very enlightened beings, and they wept when they talked about what we have done. Right? So I literally wept, and so and of course there are the reptilians. Well, those are from another dimension. David Icke doesn't understand any of this. And what's fascinating is that a little knowledge is such a dangerous thing on this, because you can go down rabbit holes that are just wrong. But they're right that there are other things out there that are worrisome, but they're not evens. They're not extraterrestrial biological entities. And by the way, I know that it was funny when Congressman Burchett, after I'd met with him, said to the public, if they were hostile, we'd be a charcoal briquette floating through space. Given what we've been doing since the 40s, knocking them down, right? Killing them. And also capturing them and torturing them. I mean, there are currently living ETs in some of these underground sites. If you go to our archive, DPIarchive.com, you'll see there's a whole section on where these black sites are. And we even have mapped where the entry points are. And this is something we're continuing to get information from. And let me put a little call out to the public. If there are people that anyone listening, or if you yourself have been in these programs, you can contact me confidentially. We will not disclose your identity, but we need the information you have, no matter how trivial you think it is, so that we can get it to the right people in Congress, in the White House, but more importantly, into these law enforcement teams, so that this mess can be straightened out before it's too late. So we're making a call for more whistleblowers, particularly ones with actionable intelligence. And you may not think what you know is important, but it is. It's part of this disclosure mosaic, I call it, is billion-piece puzzle that we're trying to put together piece by piece by piece over 35 years. And the more information we have that's about events, facilities, R&D, locations, methodologies, whatever, the better. And so we continue. I say every couple of weeks, or at least once a month, we pick up a new whistleblower. And we now have about 750 something that I've debriefed.
As a final point, because I know we don't have much time left, it seems like a paradigm shift is going to be necessary for humanity in the near future. My question is, do you think it's more likely that a sort of disclosure event would help to accelerate that paradigm shift, or is it necessary for that to occur first in order for people to properly embrace the knowledge of the ET presence?
Well, I believe we're out of time for it to be sequential and linear. So I think, it's interesting. When you talk to the man on the street, the average person believes that we're not alone. They don't have a lot of information on it. I get stopped if I go out of my building or my home, and just regular people. And my sense is that people are ready for this. I think close to 60% of the population believes we're not alone. The government's hiding something. They don't know the granular details, perhaps, but that's already baked into the cake in a lot of people's paradigm. I think what's missing is when this gets officially confirmed, what is the narrative coming from our leaders and the media? And is it the narrative that leads to panic and war and chaos, which is what this cabal wants? Or is it a narrative that says, hey, we're not alone in the universe? That's very good news. Number two, they're not hostile. Number three, the technologies we've developed from them will end poverty and end pollution within 15 or 20 years. And we're now going to start on a path to make peaceful contact with them so that humans become part of an interplanetary family. See, that narrative is very different from the sky's falling, they're here to eat us for lunch, they're raping and pillaging, and we need $100 trillion from the world economy to do Independence Day, the movie, where we go kick alien butt, like Will Smith said in that movie, right? So those are two very different outcomes. Those are two very different narratives. Unfortunately, I'd say out of 100 voices, 99 of them are spinning in the narrative that can only lead to catastrophe. And that's what worries me the most. I mean, people say what keeps me up at night the most is that. And then the same operatives move in and brainwash people with low information on the subject, like Tucker Carlson or the president or the president's son, who I've met, and they get all their information mixed up. And this happens all over the world, by the way. I mean, at every senior level of government I've met with, including the ministers of defense of Canada, Australia, Great Britain. You know, I meet with all these sorts of folks, and it's kind of like you throw all this stuff into a blender and hit the blend button. And so people get their paradigm is completely confused. So there needs to be clarity. So I'd say this coming out will be a big paradigm changer, but is it going to be short-term very bad or not? Now, that's our choice. I can't control the major media or major podcasters. And the narrative that is the dominant narrative is that there are, it's the cowboys and Indians narrative. They're the good guy aliens and the bad guy aliens, and we have to side with the good ones and fight the bad ones in this Manichaean worldview of sort of polarity and endless fighting. That is the narrative and I've had a number of people in the UFO subculture as well as journalists say that's the narrative we need because they want more funding. It's the only way they get more money, right? This is about money and power. It's not about the truth. But look, humans are very easily, what happened to 9/11, right? We go in and bust up Iraq and all this when Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with 9/11. But the public was in such a state of panic and fear. And I lived through that very much so. In fact, I was on a disclosure project tour. That event happened just a few months after the 2001 National Press Club event that 800 million people saw in 2001. You can see it on our archive. And I was in Seattle when that happened. I'd just gotten across the border from Vancouver. And I saw the reaction, and it was a master stroke of galvanizing the public through fear, a singular event that then led to policies that cost trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives unnecessarily by the military industrial contractors and Halliburton and Dick Cheney and that whole crowd. So I'm not saying 9/11 wasn't terrible. I'm just saying what we did and what the public and the media went along with, almost everyone agrees now, was a huge mistake. The question is, will the disclosure of this subject be that kind of event, or will it be a hopeful event and an event that says we can survive this period of time? And I think for younger folks like yourself and others, there's so much despair that we don't have the solutions for these intractable problems for the atmosphere and the environment and 8 billion people on the planet, 3 billion of whom are living in abject poverty and terrorism and the have and have-nots. Is there a solution? The good news is, yes, we already have it. We don't even have to develop it. We have to get it out of the black box, right? So I tell people it's actually a very hopeful message if we make it hopeful. And if we don't, it'll be a catastrophic disclosure. So I would say, let's not do catastrophic disclosure. Let's do real disclosure. And to that end, one of the things we need, and I make a call to people like Jake and his team, get us the evidence and the materials that some of those operations have, and we will put it on our blockchain and release it, and then I'll get a bunch.
That's the thing that everybody is asking for all the time.
Well, that's what was supposed to happen last year, and everyone got waved off, and they were told it would be catastrophic to do it. Let's see if we can get this sorted out in the new administration. But here we are 8 months later, and what? So I think that we need what I call not catastrophic disclosure, asymmetric disclosure. And what does that mean? It means that enough whistleblowers come with enough hard evidence and proof, and that gets put out through a blockchain system that cannot be taken down. Like my TikTok channel just got taken off completely without warning for no reason. And people should write to TikTok and complain, by the way. It's outrageous censorship of free speech. TikTok should be shut down permanently for having done this on a subject this important, frankly. There should be a cost to acting like a fascist. If they're going to act like a totalitarian fascist, they should be shut down. All right. Anyway, that's my opinion on it. But I think that if we see this go forward in the right way, and with an asymmetric cache of evidence, that will then put the Congress's feet to the fire, but also the White House's feet to the fire, right? Because they will not be able to just kick the can down the road. So I want to make a comment here. I know I'm sounding ancient, and I kind of am at this point, but we thought, everyone in my team thought 94, 95, this would all be over, all disclosed. And Clinton got threatened and got intimidated, got induced not to push on it anymore for various reasons I won't go into. And here we are 30 years later, right? So I think that something's going to have to give here. And I think that what I've heard recently from people in the White House, very close to the president, is that he's aware of this, but he's wanting to delay doing anything to the last part of his administration, like that last few months. Mm-hmm. Huge mistake. This is the same thing every president has done. And at the end of the day, they get to the edge of that and they pull back. They get to the edge of this cliff and they pull back. Same thing with members of Congress. So I think the only way to make that change is an asymmetric disclosure of materials and whistleblowers and evidence. I mean hard evidence that comes out where neither the corrupt media nor the political establishment can wiggle off that hook. It's there, it's huge, and if we receive such a cache, I will review it to remove anything that I think should be removed. For example, I will not allow out the operational schematics for an anti-gravity device, because that can be turned into a missile delivery system by any number of terrorists. So there are legitimate national security concerns. But you don't want a terrorist in Mogadishu dropping a dirty bomb in 30 seconds from Mogadishu to downtown DC. In fact, you can do that with these technologies, right? Or 5 minutes at the most, 5 minutes. So there are aspects of this that have to be looked at. But the technologies that would give you free energy for your house and car, that should be out. Right? That should have been out before I was born, and certainly before almost most of you listening were born. And we need to acknowledge the presence of these visitors. We need to make a peaceful diplomatic initiative to them. So there are a lot of things that can happen right now. And it should have happened decades ago. And I remember talking to Senator Barry Goldwater before he died out in Scottsdale. He was the senior senator from Arizona who ran for president against Lyndon Johnson in 1964. And I was at his home in Paradise Valley, Scottsdale area. And he turned to me and he said, Dr. Greer, it was a goddamn mistake then and a goddamn mistake now that this was ever kept secret. And he says, but as the leader of the Republican Party and a conservative military member of the Senate, senior member of the Senate, he says, I could never get information on this. And he had a friend, because he was an Air Force Reserve general, by the way. Senator Goldwater. People can Google Senator Barry Goldwater. Arch conservative, very controversial. I work with everyone, left, right, center. I don't care. This stuff goes above all that nonsense. Truman Show politics, I call it. But I was at his home, and he said, I said, well, how far did you get? He says, well, I was very good friends with General Curtis LeMay. And he was the nickname Bomb 'em Back to the Stone Age LeMay, because he was saying we should use nuclear weapons in Vietnam back in '64, which was a disaster. It cost Goldwater the election, frankly, because people went, oh my God, this is madness. But basically, Curtis LeMay had been chief of staff of the Air Force and had at some point been read in. So Senator Goldwater asked General Curtis LeMay about this. And Curtis LeMay says, God damn it, Barry, I can't even get into that area anymore. And if you ever ask me about this again, I will personally see that you are court-martialed out of the Air Force. Boom. And I said, I couldn't believe it. And this is mid-90s maybe. And I said, well, Senator, was he joking? He says, oh, no. He was serious as a heart attack. And I never brought it up again. And then he pivoted to saying, well, who's involved with this now? And I started naming certain names. There were people on the committee keeping the secret, and I know who a number of them are. And though I named one of them, I named a bunch of them. He didn't know them. But then I named Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. He said, oh, Bobby Ray and I are friends. I'll reach out to him for you. I said, all right. And he did. And I get a call back, and he goes, I can never make a call like that for you again. Whatever Admiral Inman said, it put the fear of God. And his daughter, Joanne Goldwater Foods of Arizona, called me. He says, Daddy can't make another call like that. It is too dangerous. So that confirmed that Admiral Bobby Ray Inman was very involved with this. Yeah.
Wow, this is a very, very deep subject that we could spend countless hours discussing. Yes. But you know as well as anybody how deep it goes. But I just wanted to thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I really like the kind of hopeful message that we kind of touched upon just before about how the way that this rolls out is kind of up to us, and that's what I want to leave people with, because that's the way I choose to look at things, and the way I honestly feel. That resonates with me. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome, and that's the whole purpose of why I still do this. I think we can make it through, and I think it will create the potential for a new civilization on Earth that will be on here for thousands of years, prosperous, peaceful, interplanetary, just amazing future awaits us. And I have 11 grandchildren now, and I think, wow,
it could be a great future.
Oh yeah, it will be.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Greer. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for watching.
See you.
Take care. I'll see you next time.